DVT Insights session today. We are about to begin. We'll just give other folks a minute or two to join us and give Jamie a chance there to fill up on some of that coffee, make sure he's ready to go.
It's chai tea, not the...
Now there's real designer characteristic for you. It can't be as simple as coffee. It needs to be something special.
If you can imagine me hopped up on caffeine, you know you got a problem.
I think that would be a special thing, Jamie. I really do. I think I'm going to insist on trying that at some point in time. He's great at what he does on chai tea. Just imagine what he could do with a couple of espresso shots in there.
If you've ever seen the Tasmanian Devil.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Just imagine how quickly you could get through everything.
Including life.
All right. Well, while we amuse ourselves, our wonderful participants have all been joining in, which is great. And again, welcome to today's DVT Insights session. We're looking and talking about design, both the UX UI side of things, as well as some insights from Jamie Chisholm, one of our seniors within the UX and UI function here at DVT. Jamie, thank you so much for giving up your time today and coming in and presenting the talk. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, even if that is only fueled at a chai tea level. That's okay. If we feel like we need to speed things up, we know where to send the coffee. That would be great, I suppose.
I'll never miss up an opportunity to force my opinion on somebody else.
Oh, wonderful, Jamie, wonderful. Just for our audience today, Jamie will do the presenting first. If you do have any questions or there's anything that you would like to raise, please use the chat function. I'll be monitoring that and watching for your questions, and I will pose those through to Jamie. At the end of the session today, Jamie will also take a couple of questions from you, so please do wait in for that session and we will pick up from there. And with that said, I will leave it to you, Jamie. Thank you again. We're looking forward to hearing this.
Okay, great. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm pretty sure you've guessed I'm Jamie. If you haven't, then you may have a serious attention deficit disorder. Megan, I see that you are in the participants list. If I could ask you to do a repeat of the last time, that would be really helpful to me. Would you be willing to do that? Great, thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to do, or what a professional would have done, is I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And then I'm going to go here. All right. Paul, can you see my screen? I'll assume if you can, everybody else can.
Yeah, all good, Jamie. Ready to go.
Okay, great. All right. So just to start things off, this is one of, if not one of the most important quotes about design that I've ever found. And I'll just read it out to you as if you're all illiterate. It says, a designer knows he has achieved perfection not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. I come from a very deep-seated philosophical background when it comes to design, and I definitely have some perspectives on it, but I think this is one of the most important, and I'll get into why. So, welcome everybody to everything you wanted to know about design, but were too afraid to ask. I'll be your host, Jamie. I can't think of anybody else I could be at this point other than Batman, because why wouldn't you be Batman? Okay, so let's do a quick introduction in terms of who I am for anybody here that doesn't know me. All right, so I studied design in the 1990s. That's quite a few years ago for people who struggle with mathematics. I worked both in freelance and full-time design for about 25 years. If you'll excuse my accent, I was born in Britain, so it sometimes vacillates between local South African and heavy British, probably Birmingham. Okay, so I started off in print, and then I moved to a print digital hybrid, and then I moved all the way to all digital. I have managed to teach myself of quite a few things in my time well, my 25 years of doing design, I've also forgotten quite a lot. But in my work career, I've managed to work either directly for or have done work for companies that include Discovery, MultiChoice, Telcom, Unilever, Apple, as well as Disney, to name but a few. All right. So anybody that knows me in person knows that sometimes I struggle with my tact a little bit, but I can tell you right now that there are trigger warnings in this presentation. So if you're easily offended, please feel free to mute me, remove your earphones, or do whatever it is that you feel is necessary. But I'm giving you that warning right now because there's a trigger warning coming up. And the reason it's a trigger warning is, from my perspective, if you create UX without UI, that's okay. If you are on the research side of design and you don't actually do the design itself, that's perfectly understandable. Not everybody can do the user interface side of things. Sorry, for perspective, those who don't know, UX is the user experience, what the person is experiencing as they use a product, whether it's an application, whether it's opening a box, of cereal, whether it's a website, it doesn't matter. That's the experience that a user has. The user interface, or specifically to digital, is what they are seeing and how it's laid out. So if you create UX without implementing UI, that's absolutely fine. However, if you create UI, user interfaces, without implementing UX, that's irresponsible. The reason I say that is because there's already a bit of a perspective from people outside of the design community that designers are merely pixel pushers, that we just make pretty things and that's about it. We cannot put, as designers, we cannot put anything down on a screen or on paper without knowing why it's there. Okay, so I'll get into a few details as we go, but that's just one of my philosophies to start off the presentation. Okay, so with that said, we'll move on to the real stuff. And we're going to start with what design is not. Design is definitely not an us versus them. It's not designers versus developers. It's not designers versus business analysts or CEOs or product owners. It is absolutely not a competitive type of work area. It is not web design versus mobile. It's none of that. It is absolutely unequivocally not art. The reason I say that is because art is an emotive experience. You feel as if you want to create something, and so you just have to put it out there. That is not what design is. In fact, it doesn't even belong to the designer. Designers are merely babysitting. Somebody's coming to the designer and saying, I have an idea, and I don't know how to portray this idea, how to get it down on paper, how to put it on a screen. We take whatever information is given and we turn into the translator. We spew, I don't want to say spew that, although I just did. We translate ideas into visual forms. What design is not as well is buzzwords. I'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but buzzwords have become very, very popular in most industries, but especially with design being what it is, which is a very, very subjective field. Buzzwords have or were implemented to help us out in terms of translating what we do to people outside of the design spectrum. And unfortunately, it's kind of snowballed, but truth be told, buzzwords are not what design is. Design is also not perfect. It's a hit and miss profession. Thank goodness other professions such as the medical field are not hit and miss. We often have to make mistakes in the design profession in order to find out exactly what is required or what is the best route to take. It is also not linear. It is a very, in fact, I'll say that design is possibly one of the best suited fields to work within the agile framework, because it's very iterative and we're able to jump back and forth between things very, very quickly. It helps that it's not a linear process. But one final thing, no. Just because I work in the IT field, it doesn't mean I can fix your phone, your laptop, your TV, or your printer. And I'm pretty sure most of you that have or do work in the IT field have had to answer a question like that in some way or shape or form. Anyway, let me have a quick sip. All right. So now that we've established what design isn't, what is design? Design is, first off, creative. It is a creative process. As much as it is an art, it does require out-the-box thinking. It does require a lot of lateral thinking exercises in order to come up with certain solutions. It definitely is collaborative. This is why I say it's not an us versus them. It's people working together, designers getting perspectives from non-designers, from other designers, from fields outside of their own spectrum. It's making sure that they're keeping the customer at the forefront of their mind. But in order to do that, it is a collaborative experience. It's a team experience. Even if you're working on your own as a designer, you have to involve other people in some way, shape, or form, even if it's only on a mental spectrum. As I mentioned before, design is iterative. It's going in, trying a few things, making mistakes, testing them out, seeing if they work. If they don't, try it again. And then only once that cycle is complete and everybody's happy, only then do we move on to deployment. But yes, it's a very iterative process. Please stop me if I'm going too fast here. Design is definitely problem solving. I absolutely love problem solving. I have a Rubik's Cube on my desk. I just love puzzles and riddles and all sorts of things. But design is problem solving. It is somebody coming up to you and saying, I have a problem. I don't know how to fix it. And graphic design, the word graphic design literally means visual problem solving, solving a problem in a visual way. So yes, it is a problem-solving profession, but unfortunately, it's also a thankless profession. And I'm pretty sure that most of the people in this room would, even if you're not in design, would go, well, my career is thankless as well. But in listening to podcasts, I had the opportunity to hear other people's perspectives. And one thing that came up quite recently, I'd say about 2 to 3 months ago, I was listening to a podcast and they're talking about video games. And the one person said, have you noticed there's always an award for best voice actor, best graphics, best sound, best music, but there's never an award for best UI or best UX. And that's the truth, because at the end of the day, this is a field where what you are doing has to be invisible to everybody else. It has to feel as natural as possible. Anyway, design is also possibly only 40% actual design. That's the UX, user experience, or UI, user interface side of things. It's only about 40%. And that is according to a number that I just made up for the purposes of this presentation. So I hear you ask in your silent, muted forms, what's the other 60%? And that's a fair question. The other 60% is effective communication. It's being able to get responses, problem solve, make decisions. It increases productivity. It's communicating with people who don't necessarily have the same perspective or the same ideas as yourself, even the same ability to visualize a solution in their mind. Not everybody's like that. Designers tend to be capable of visualizing something in their head and going, okay, I can see how this is going to work. Not everybody's like that. And you have to learn as a designer You have to learn how to be able to effectively communicate with people who don't necessarily speak that language. So in order to illustrate my point, Megan, I'm going to ask you to unmute and do your thing. So we're going to do a quick survey. Carl, I will ask you to give me a poll at the end of this, just to tell me how many people raised their hand. So we're going to do a quick survey here. We're testing who's paying attention and who isn't. Everybody that's staring at your phone with your earphones in, you're about to be found out. So this is your warning call. So we're putting you in a hypothetical situation. You've just arrived at a mechanic. Now, it could be anybody, but for the sake of this presentation, we've made it a mechanic. You've hired a mechanic to look at your car, and you just tell you what's wrong with it, and so that you can get a quote and fix it. But you're about to hear the following. Megan, let me just hear if you can speak.
I can.
Okay, you can speak. It's amazing. All right, so you hear the following from your mechanic. Megan, take it away.
Megan the mechanic.
Yep.
Yeah, so like, you know, like we looked at your like car and like, you know, yeah, like, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, like it's not lekker, hey. Like it's like pretty bad, and like we looked and like, oh, you know, we're gonna like need to do complete like overhaul on the, you know, engine. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was impeccable as always. So I'm going to do a quick survey. Carl, I'm going to ask you to check whether the majority of hands are raised. Please, can you give me a yes or a no? Would you accept this mechanic's communication to you and still fix your car there? Yes, I'd stay there. Or no, raise your hand if no, I'd go somewhere else. I don't trust this person. I don't like the way they're communicating to me. This person doesn't sound like they know what they're doing. Just raise your hand if no is your answer, and you would take it somewhere else. And Carl, just let me know how many people raise their hands.
There are a lot of raised hands. Right, so far we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, 9 trusting souls. Was a hand raise a yes, I trust, or no, I don't trust?
Hand raise is no. No, I do not trust this person. I would go somewhere else.
Okay. So I think we're sitting at about half yes. Oh, we're slightly over half going yes at the moment.
Okay, that's all right. All right, so what we're establishing here is that when you go to somebody for a job to be done, you expect a professional attitude. You expect the person to sound like they know what they're speaking about. So my question to everybody here is, why should designers not be held to the same standard? Why should anybody take a designer seriously if they speak any other way other than professionally? So this is why I say design is 60% effective communication, because the truth be told, you can have the most amazing design, but if you're unable to sell it, if you're unable to convince people that you have done your research and that you know what you're doing, they're not going to invest time in your design or yourself. So on the back of designers needing to be effective communicators, designers should also be storytellers. Now, I'm sure this might sound a little bit confusing, but I don't necessarily mean bedtime stories or nursery rhyme tellers. But let me explain to you why I'm saying that. So let's imagine someone reads the first few pages of a book or watches the first few minutes of a movie. They call you or they come to you and they tell you, listen, you have to read this book. You have to watch this movie. I just started it. It looks amazing. You go away, you read the book, you watch the movie, you research the characters, you complete a flipping thesis on this thing, on the social impact and the cultural importance of whatever this book is or whatever this movie is. You come back and you start discussing the ending of the book or the movie, and how all the meanings and the subplots it's got, the nuance of the writing. You're going on like this, and the person that came to you is still in the same spot as when you left them. Now, the unfortunate truth is, this is how stakeholders can feel, because they come to you with an idea. When I say you, they come to a designer with an idea, and they say, I have this idea. I think it should look something like this, but I don't know. A designer goes away, does all of the research, they come back, but emotionally or even logically, the stakeholder, the CEO, the product owner is not there. They don't understand exactly what's gone on. So you need to be able to, or a designer needs to be able to do the research, implement their ideas, but also possess the ability to take the listener, so the client, the product owner, the CEO, whoever, on a nuanced journey through not only the research that they carried out, but also the various solutions that they attempted, the reasoning behind how and why they got to the final conclusion they did. They need to be able to get the listener on their side, effectively in the same emotional or mental space as the designer. And that's also why designers not only have to be very good storytellers, but have to be damn near experts in psychology. So, again, I hear you ask, but why in your Ryan Reynolds voice? So, let me tell you. Because a designer not only needs to be able to empathize with people that they may never have met or even shared experiences with, but they also need to understand how human beings operate, basic human behavior, human responses, and they need to know, in many cases, what people want or need, even if they aren't aware of it. I'm going to use an example. So a quote often associated with Henry Ford is, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, for anybody that's too young in the participants list, if you're not aware, Henry Ford was the first person to create a production line that allowed everyday people such as you and I to experience the amazing ability to own and drive a car. Before the motor car was invented, the motorized carriage, before that was invented, people only understood what they had, which was horses and trains. So unfortunately, in many situations, even today, when we consider ourselves much more worldly and full of information, a lot of the time we can't comprehend what we can't see or we don't know exists. But just one final warning before I move on to the next slide: just don't believe everything you read on the internet. It's not safe. Okay, but I am going to give you a real world example. So before Steve Jobs introduced this little thing that he's holding in this photo back in 2007, which is quite a while ago, I'm pretty sure most of you should know what this is. If you don't, I'll take pity on you and tell you this is the very first iPhone, 2007. Before Steve Jobs introduced this in that year, every smartphone looked like this. So if Steve Jobs, if Apple had gone around and asked people very much in the same way that Nokia, BlackBerry, and every other phone manufacturer at the time did, if they'd gone and asked people, what do you want? People would have said bigger keyboards. If you don't believe me, Google the Nokia communicator. That thing was a laptop in your pocket. So sometimes, as a designer, you need to be so far ahead of the curve that you're creating things nobody knows exists yet. Okay, so I've deviated a little bit, but we'll get back to the main thread, which was what design is. So design is also inspirational and aspirational. We try to inspire people around us, as do many professions, but we also try to aspire to be better. We try to get people to aim higher, reach a little further. And for that reason, designers push developers further than they ever thought they could go. So there's definitely been a little, well, I've heard a lot said about designers versus developers, and that's not a perspective I like to share, because I've always found it to be a very much a push-pull relationship. So designers push developers, but developers also help those designers to remain realistic. This is just factual. If this relationship did not exist, then websites would still look like this. Take a moment to look at this and understand how far we've come in the 20 or so years of 22 years or whatever of having the internet, having websites. Consider how far we've come, how much we've improved. If there was not that dynamic between a designer and a developer, we would not have the websites we have today. I've been in those meetings where developers have said to me, I'm sorry, we cannot do a curved line. And I've said, find a way, because we cannot have everything looking like square and rectangular blocks. It just doesn't look attractive. So that relationship has to exist. So designers inspire developers, developers inspire designers. It's definitely a relationship that should be built upon and improved. So back to what I said about buzzwords. Now, I despise buzzwords, but I have to admit that they can be useful. Now, one of the things that is difficult for anybody outside of the design spectrum or field to understand is that design has very strange success and failure matrix, because if a developer were, and I'm picking on developers, I apologize, but if a business analyst or a developer, whoever, were to create a document, create a button or a website or a piece of code that when they sent it out, it consistently came back with changes, there would be a problem. Within design, that is normal. If a doctor operated on a patient, the patient went away and then came back and said, look, I'm not happy. The patient kept coming back. That would be problematic, but this is where a designer lives. They need to do natural, small, iterative changes in order to get to where they need to be. So because of that, buzzwords started being created, such as design thinking, brand storytelling, and even skeuomorphism, that essentially give names or naming conventions to things that designers understand almost innately, but the larger business doesn't necessarily have any cognizance of what it means or what they're trying to achieve. So the reason that I say they can be useful is because they enable us to get to a point faster. They enable us to create a way to communicate with people outside of design and help them understand exactly what it is we're trying to do. But there can be, let's call them issues, where people start pushing buzzwords back at a designer, and it can throw them off in terms of people sounding like they know what they're talking about, but they don't necessarily have any cognizance of what it is. So, and again, I'm going to give another trigger warning. Hopefully not everybody's not tired of that yet. But the next thing that I'm about to say is a designer cannot and should not design for absolutely everyone. So while at its basis, design should always be accessible, usable, and inclusive, sometimes to be inclusive, you have to be exclusive. So what do I mean by that? So with every single situation you attempt to include in your problem solving, you risk the possibility of making it harder for someone else to make a simple choice. The more data and choices you provide an end user on any specific page, the more danger you create of creating cognitive overload. And every decision you make costs your client money. So I'm going to give you a real world example, because that's how I roll, as you kids say. This is a picture, but there's a video game If anybody likes video games in the chat, this is called The Witcher 3. It came out in 2015, and it had more than 100 hours of gameplay. It took about 3.5 years to develop and cost $46 million. Now that's, I mean, to anybody with half a brain, that is a lot of money. But now I'm going to do a comparison. So here we have Witcher 3, 2015, over 100 hours of gameplay, $46 million. And it only took 3.5 years to develop. In, I think, 2020, The Last of Us Part 2 came out. Had about 24 hours of gameplay, took double the time to develop. So a quarter of the gameplay, double the time to develop, and it cost over $100 million. Why is that? So I'm going to give you a perspective on this, but this isn't obviously the overarching answer. So a large part of the budget was formed by attempting to include almost every visual deficit in humans outside of complete blindness. That's color blindness, that it's people susceptible to flashing lights, it's people with on almost the entire spectrum of color blindness, so not just red green, but there are multiple variances of color blindness. People who struggle to see but are not completely blind, they put everything but the kitchen sink into this game in an attempt to make sure it was as accessible as possible for everybody that wanted to play it. Now, that is absolutely commendable, but that costs money. It costs time, it costs money, and there is, as of yet, 2 years later, no actual metric showing whether that decision, even as lauded and praised as it was a worthwhile one. Because if you are releasing something that needs to go out to 100 million people, and only 100 people are going to use your accessibility features, then you have a problem that you need to justify that budget. So accommodating everyone really does mean accommodating everyone. That's visual impairment, auditory impairment, dexterity issues, psychological and sociological issues. The list literally goes on. So the more attention you pay as a designer, as a problem solver, on one specific problem or one specific impairment issue, the more you risk leaving somebody else out, and the more problems and costs you're setting you and your customer up for. So your designs or a designer's designs are the voice for the client. They're not a personal platform to educate the world. Especially when you look at Hollywood these days, there seems to be this push towards let's educate people because people don't understand what's going on. Unfortunately, and I've heard this from quite a few designers, even recently, where designers have said, I do not want to put my name to this because I'm ashamed of it or I don't agree with the client. End of the day, it doesn't matter, because all you can do is what the client asks. If you were a doctor and somebody comes to you and says, I have a problem, and you say to them, well, I can fix your problem, but in order to do that, you need to, let's say, as an example, you need to quit smoking, or you need to stop drinking, or you need to stop partying till 11 o'clock at night. As a doctor, that's the most you can do. Give them advice. You can't stop them from smoking. You can't stop them from drinking or partying or whatever it is that might be damaging them. All you can do is tell them what the problem is, how it can be solved, and what steps they need to begin taking. Beyond that, it's up to them. And in the same way, a designer's in the same position. You cannot make the call for your client. You can give them your research, give them your perspective, but at the end of the day, what they choose to do with your work is their choice. And that's why being a designer is not a soapbox. It's not up to you. Sorry if they came across as rather heated, but as much as I'm speaking right now, listening is as, if not more, important is speaking. A designer, so not unlike any other field such as developing or business analyst, they need to be able to work within a confined arena with specific tools, specific components, and still maintain the basic principles of that design philosophy. And one of the tools that anybody can use is just being able to listen. One of the things that I heard from a fellow DVTer is the thing that I learned to do is to learn how to be wrong faster in order to find out where I went wrong so I can course correct. And the only way you can ever find out if you're doing something wrong is to listen. That's just the honest truth. And that's just a basic principle within the design philosophy. Hopefully that you can use that in your field. So additionally, a designer needs to know when to fight and when to shut up. So unfortunately, not in, as is the case with every type of thing, whether it's relationships or work, not every battle is worth fighting or worth even winning. Sometimes designers just need to realize that they can either fight for something small or save their energy for something larger and more worthwhile. It's also, it is a case where it's very easy to, especially when you're coming out of college or wherever, where you're going, when I do a design, the developers will listen to me and they will build it exactly to spec, and they won't talk back to me. I will make sure that they bow down to my will. And then you actually meet the human being on the other end of this, who's just one lone person that's overworked, got more work than they can handle, and probably hasn't slept properly in about 3 months. Suddenly you start seeing that not everything has to be perfect. So you really need to know when to fight for something and when to back off. Okay, I really went off on a bit of a tangent there, so I'm going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming. Technology isn't natural, but it's a designer's job to make it feel that way. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If we look at this screen, which many of you, whether you use an Android phone or an iOS device, shouldn't matter. You've seen something like this because phones are just prevalent everywhere these days. But if you look at it, this is not a piece of nature. This is a man-made device or a machine-made device, whatever you want to call it. And yet, the designers have made it feel so natural to just tap something with your index finger or your thumb and move it around or activate it. It feels as if this is just how it should be. Even now, my 4-year-old daughter thinks that she should be able to just press on the TV and drag things around because that's what she can do on other devices. But that's what a designer's job is, to make something that doesn't feel natural, doesn't feel normal or even exist within a person's spectrum of understanding. Make it feel as if it's the most natural thing in the world. So a few tips for designers in the audience and anyone else who cares to listen. Do it, don't do it, your choice. Creativity isn't just a tap that you can turn off and on again. So some ways to inspire creativity within yourself are to draw, sketch, doodle. Even if you're not an artist, that doesn't matter. Just scribbling on a pad can help. Write with your non-dominant hand. That can activate certain neurons in your brain, help get you thinking in a different way. Read, go for a run or do some exercise, and do something that's really kind of abnormal or out of the ordinary for you, because it means that you're going to be activating far more of your brain. You won't be able to operate on automatic. So that's one way you can bring out or inspire some creativity within yourself. Next thing is question everything. Far too often, I have been in meetings where people throw around acronyms and whatever else, just, as if everybody in the room should understand exactly what it is. And far too many times I've been that person that said, sorry, can you just tell me what that acronym means? And everybody just kind of looked around and said, well, actually, we don't know. It's just something we use. It's so important to question everything. A quick story is I was working at a company and a client said, we need you to come in and redesign our entire application. And so we went in, we looked, we spoke to the person, and they were throwing around buzzwords, and it almost felt as if they were, getting us drunk and blinding us with science. They kept throwing around all this stuff, and it really sounded like they knew what they wanted and why they wanted it. But we asked the question, what exactly is the problem? Where did it start? And suddenly they said, well, it's this one page. Every time people get to this one page, they struggle. And we just figure, let's just redo everything. In asking that question, we saved the client not only a few $100,000, but we also took what would have been a 6-month to 12-month project and whittled it down to a 3-week project. Just by saying, look, what you've got right now is pretty decent. You just need to fix this one thing, and then your flow is going to be improved. So remember, in questioning everything, it's not just for you, but you're helping other people out. Other people are investing time and money in you. And you need to understand that that money's got to come from somewhere. That time has to come from somewhere. So you need to be able to make those calls and understand, hey, you know what? There are human beings on the other end of this. We need to make sure that this is being done for the right reason. So question everything. But also, don't be afraid to not know the answer. Even myself, after as many years as I've been in this business, I get into situations where somebody will ask a question and I don't necessarily know the answer right then and there. That's okay. Just answer honestly, say, look, I don't know the answer to that, but let me do my research, let me go check, and I'll come back to you. That is absolutely fine. In fact, people will probably respect you more as long as it's not a case of somebody asking, well, why did you put the button in the bottom left instead of the bottom right? If you don't know why you didn't do that, then please go back to the top of the presentation, because I informed you right then and there why that was a bad idea. Okay, so finally, a designer at the end of the day needs to find their own voice. So I've said quite a few things here, and they may or may not apply to you, but the truth is we all need to find our own way of doing things. I come from a little bit more of a philosophical way of looking at things, but please go out there, find your own voice, and just figure out how to be the best version of yourself in your job, your profession as possible. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now. And if there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
Great stuff, Jamie. For our audience, again, please, if you have any questions, raise those in the chat window. I'll take a look at those. And if you're asking questions appropriate of our Chai-powered design guru, then we shall pose those to him. In the interim, Jamie, maybe I'll just throw something in your direction just to keep you going and keep those wheels turning. Nowadays, I guess we're seeing in the world of technology and applications, mobile applications and others, that functionality is almost an expectation from people that I will be able to do X, Y, and Z. The layer on top of that now is almost certainly UX and the combination of UI that realizes that UX. Are you finding that people are more conscious of that need now? So not just building an application that does something, but does it well in terms of user experience? Look,
I have seen a definite shift in terms of the mentality or the perspective within design and within the outside world looking at design. But and I also think that maybe buzzwords have formed a bit of a problem with this. a lot of the time people throw around words like UX, usability testing, whatever else, and all they mean is, I saw this online, or I saw somebody else do the same thing for me, and just give me the result. Even in large corporations here within South Africa that I'm not going to name within the call, there's always that perspective of, we value user input, we value usability testing, and then behind closed doors is, but we just don't have the time for it. So what does happen though is people are big, I think, because of social media and communication channels being a lot more open these days, especially when it comes to feedback. What has happened is people are more aware or cognizant of issues that their customers are facing. So they're more willing to iterate on things, as opposed to back in the day where you just put something out and then 4 years later bring out a new variant of it. We are now in a position where we can say, okay, we release something this month, next month we'll release version 2. So there's a lot more openness to that kind of iterative process.
Yeah, I guess within most competing organizations that have something in the digital channel, they've kind of closed the gap on the functionality side, and now they're competing on that experience side to go, well, it's easier, better, faster, cleaner, nicer, warmer to work through our digital channel than a competitor's digital channel. And I think that probably links with the question that's coming through from Megan and a couple of others. In terms of working with stakeholders, particularly, I guess, on the client side, and persuading them that the investment in UX is critical to achieving great UI and consequently customer experience with their channels. The elements that come into that discussion to persuade them or get them to make commitment in that, are you finding there particular elements that are coming up in that discussion? Things like customer acquisition costs and customer retention costs?
To be fair, it's usually time. Time is always the one thing that comes up above anything else. I'm very cognizant of monetary involvement and costs, but most of the time people are saying, look, we've scheduled for this to go out within X amount of weeks or months. We just don't have the time. But when it comes to persuading, it goes back to that storytelling aspect that I mentioned during the presentation. Because if you, as a human being, are aware of why you need it, there had to be certain thought processes or certain things that happened for you to understand why it's necessary. What you need to do then is, when you go into the meeting, don't just start off with, we need to do usability testing. You've got to build up to it. You've got to go, okay, well, look, this is what I was doing. And especially tell people where you failed. Tell people where something didn't work. Tell them why it didn't work. Build them up to where they need to be. Nobody went to go watch Titanic in 1997 just to watch the Titanic sink. It was the build up to it. And you've got to have that same philosophy when it comes to working with stakeholders. You've got to build them up, work them up to where you need them to be, and then hit them with that final nail.
Well, Jamie, I think you should keep in mind that some of us watch Titanic because we're fans of icebergs, but that's for another day, I guess.
That's pretty deep.
Yeah. Well, what, 20% on top and 80% below the water, yeah? Just exactly. Like design. Ah, good. And in that space, I guess it's always a good question to ask folks like you that have had experience in the industry. What's an example of the major challenges that you've faced in terms of working with people and getting them to understand the value of the processes and the capabilities that you bring to an engagement?
Look, one of the biggest challenges that I've found is that everybody thinks in a different way, and everybody's coming at the same problem from a different angle. That's why I say it's not an us versus them, and it shouldn't ever be an us versus them. It's like when you go to the gym, everybody's just trying to get healthier. It's not, oh, that guy's trying to look better than me, or that girl's trying to do the splits more than I can do it. everybody's trying to work towards the same goal. They're just approaching it from a slightly different angle. So when it comes to the difficulties, it usually comes down to making an attempt to understand where people are coming from, where their perspective or where their fundamental issues are lying, and how you can address that in your own way. Obviously, if you know that somebody's coming at something from a monetary or time side of things, you can, as a designer, manipulate your narrative to include that perspective and say, okay, look, I get what you're saying, but if we do this, we'll actually free up some time or free up some budget or whatever else. But you need to speak to people on their own level, which is why communication. I'll say anybody that was part of the grad program, they got sick of hearing me say communication. At the end of the day, that's going to solve most of your problems. It's not 100% foolproof, obviously, because people are human. But if you can communicate, and communication is listening and understanding and empathizing from the perspective of somebody else, not just this is how I speak.
Yeah. There's a great question in from one of my audience members that relates to what you were talking about early on, is that connection and collaboration between the design members of a team and the developers within a team. And the question really revolved around, well, on the developer side, for the assets that they create, they typically use something like GitHub or another code repository in order to hold that, combine things and bring it together. And the question posed was, do designers have something similar to that? And I know there's an answer to that, which leads into also the direct connection between the design elements and the dev elements. Could you just talk to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, there are specific repositories or websites that people can, or designers specifically can go look at. But I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's kind of working with their hands tied. You know, I mean, whether it's we can only work with these specific colors. I mean, I once knew somebody that was a designer at Nedbank, and I'd say, oh, that's really cool. You get to work at Nedbank. That, you know, it's a nationwide business. Everybody knows what Nedbank is, and they go, oh yeah, I get to design in 3 shades of green every day. But everybody, whether it's developer, designer, or whoever, they've got their hands tied in some way. That kind of acknowledgement is needed at the forefront of everything. But yes, I mean, even within the web space, a lot of people will say, well, please refer to Google's material.io as for the components that we need to be using, or for the way the components need to work, because both the human interface design on the Apple side and material design from Google are global. So instead of reinventing the wheel each time, it's very easy for designers to just go to something like that and pull from that and use that as a basis for what they need, as opposed to starting from scratch each time. Hopefully that semi answers the question.
Yeah, and I guess the extension on that, Jamie, is kind of going, all right, so there's also things like design systems where the designers can put together specs that developers can pick up on and start to use in a consistent way, right?
Absolutely, but if somebody has to build that design system at the end of the day, and material.io or material design and human interface design are design systems, so they're pre-built, and in very much the same way that developers might go to Stack Overflow for hints and tips or tricks or whatever. Yes, there are pre-existing repositories or pre-existing websites that designers can go see, but when it comes to design systems and design libraries, somebody has to build that. And from my perspective, developers should be involved in that, because a designer needs to know from a developer side what they can do, what they aren't necessarily comfortable doing, and what they definitely can't do within the budget or the time constraints, and using that information, building on that, and that way everybody's agreeing from the offset, at least you would hope. But yes, design systems, design libraries, I remember when the talk of those first started coming about, And designers everywhere, including myself, were going, oh, great, that's just going to kill our creativity. But truth be told, it is very helpful, not only for new designers entering a company to be able to go, hey, look, here's our design library, here's our design system, just go look. You'll understand exactly what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it. And then, but also designers that have been at a company for a while, it gets draining rebuilding the same thing over and over again. So just being able to pull it from a pre-existing repository is very, very helpful.
All right. And Jamie, you've kind of said that the secret sauce to all of this being successful is communication. And that will help kind of get you through a lot of the challenges in the design space, working with folks, both on, I guess, the client side as well as the team side in terms of doing that. But if you were to go from your experience, the three things that you would list that are going to result in epic fails, what might those three things be?
Okay. Number one, obviously, not communicating, not keeping everybody involved is number one on my list. Number two, going back to what I said, not keeping the user at the forefront of your mind when building anything. When you put a button on a page or within an application, you need to know why. When you make it a specific color, you need to know why. And if you don't, that's going to be an absolutely epic failure right away. And the final thing, and it's kind of based off of that second point, not going into any meeting with a utility belt of facts that you can pull from, whether it's research you've done, whether it's decisions you've made, failures that you've had. You need to be able to pull from this little belt of facts whenever a question is posed at you, so that you can say, the reason I did this is X. The reason I didn't do that is Y. If you do not go into a meeting, especially with stakeholders, product owners, business analysts, whoever, they will second guess you at every moment and shut you down completely, and you'll just be there sitting on your hands. And that kind of goes back to what I said in the presentation about professionalism, at the very least, sounding like you know what you're talking about. Nobody's going to trust anybody, or maybe half the people in this meeting, based on the hands that went up. At least half the people would not trust somebody that doesn't sound like they know what they're speaking about.
Indeed. Jamie, perhaps a last element to equip our audience perhaps with some facts to put in that back belt of theirs when they go into their next UX UI session. If you were to list three possibly of the current sites or products or pieces that you've seen out there where you go, that's an example of great UX UI being brought to bear in terms of a digital channel, where might you point people?
Look, I don't know about three, but I mean, first and foremost, even though I'm an Android user, at least for right now, I would definitely say apple.com is an excellent place to go look and see how simplicity can really sell, and how important it is, going back to that first quote about knowing, not adding more stuff, but learning when to take things away. So definitely apple.com, just in terms of an inspirational view. Then definitely material.io in terms of the perspective of building a design system, understanding tools or pre-built components and how they should be working. Because truth be told, Google have been doing this for 20 plus years. So they've made their mistakes. They have done their research. So work off of the back of that. And then finally, the one thing I'll say is I won't actually point to a website, but I'll say find inspiration in other things that you wouldn't expect to find the inspiration in. As an example, one of the things I've told people is, if you look at Back to the Future, the movie, 1985, you'll see that right at the beginning, there is a shot during the credits, and it essentially is the entire plot of the movie. And it's on a subconscious level, it gets people ready for what they're about to see. But at the same time, it's also kind of telling you what's going to happen. And that was made by a designer, not necessarily a graphic designer or a digital designer, but that was made by a designer with psychology in mind. So the reason I say that is because we as people need to find inspiration everywhere. And one of the quotes I remember is Thomas Edison. I think it was Thomas Edison, when he failed 1,000 times to get a light bulb working, and people said, "Oh, you failed 1,000 times." And he says, "No, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I discovered 1,000 ways how not to make a light bulb." And that's the thing. Go look for outside of your spectrum, outside of where you would normally, because I can give you awwards.com for amazing websites. I can give you applications to show you what an amazing application should look like. But truth be told, you need to find it in your own place, find inspiration in your own home, find inspiration on Pinterest, find inspiration out in the real world, because that's where people that walk this earth before us got their inspiration. We stand right now, today in 2022, on the shoulders of giants that are probably never going to be as appreciated as they should be.
Well, I think the appreciation is definitely going to come from the homework of being asked to go away and watch the Back to the Future movies again. Jamie, with that fantastic talk today, thank you so much for your time. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you having been there. I would look forward to having you again at one of our next DVT Insights session. Jamie, I am sure we will have you back to share more of your expertise in the near future.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.